Hello and welcome to the 706 podcast, our mid-season finale. We are first going to count down our top 5 movies of 2015, and then we will get on to the main topic, which will be the excellent movie, Body of Lies. Some call it Citizen Kane 2, some call it Wizard of Oz, More Oz, some call it Goodfellas, Even Better Fellas. Anyways, we'll get to that later. But first, let me go around and ask our my co-hosts to say their names, please.
My name is Tony, actually.
I'm Connor.
And I'm Anthony.
Excellent. So we're all acquainted. So now, let's get to the recap, the synopsis of the year that was, right? The year that was. So who would like to go first? Anybody have any?
You want me to make a synopsis of the year, like everything that happened?
Yes. How was the weather? I mean, do you have any idea geopolitical
Do you want to start with February or May or January?
I'm a March guy. I love my March, and this March was no exception. March is the worst month.
What are you talking about?
This was a great March. So much happened in March. But this is not what it's about.
All right,
I'll get to my list. This is my list.
All right.
The top 5 movies of the year. It's an unimpeachable list. Number 5 is Mad Max Fury Road. One of the great movies of our time. Number 4 is I'm drawing a total blank. Beasts of No Nation. It's on Netflix and in theaters too, apparently, but no one saw it in theaters. Number 3 is Inside Out, which is a Pixar movie with emotions. And number 2, or am I in 2?
Yeah. Is
Sicario. It's very violent. I enjoyed that. And number 1 is Anomalisa, which is a puppet movie. Kirk, do you have a list?
Yes, I do have a list, Tony. Thanks for asking. So, my list is as follows. I would say, I've been a little bit ambivalent towards my order, but I think the order is as follows. Number 5 would be Crimson Peak, which I saw with Anthony opening night. Number 4 would be Phoenix. Number 4 would be Phoenix, which, interestingly enough, was pretty much the first activity that all 4 of us did together at the beginning of this semester. So it has a fond place in my heart. Number 3 would be Spotlight, which I just recently saw on Thanksgiving break. Number 2 would be Anomalisa. No shock there. Maybe that it's 2 instead of 1, but number 1 for me. Tony's number 5, Mad Max Fury Road. Love it to death.
All right.
We'll defend it to the death as well. All right.
Okay, here's my list. Number 5, Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 2.
All right. Yes.
Nice. It's a great movie.
Number 4.
We all love this movie, by the way. It's got fairly mixed reviews, but everyone who's seen it, Kirk hasn't
seen it.
But the 3 of us loved it.
The very idea of splitting a book into... Never mind. All right.
That's just, yeah.
Number 4, I call it E.T. 2. Bridge of Spies.
Very nice.
Number 3, I think I got to give it to Mad Max Fury Road. Number 2, I give to Z for Zachariah. Movie that no one seems to be talking about, but was really good. And number 1, I gotta give to Anomalisa. Okay. Honorable mention to Chappie. Chappie was not treated very well. Chappie deserved better.
Well, to be clear, I don't think Chappie's a particularly good movie, but it's not the piece of garbage that everyone's led you to believe. It's okay. Make up your own mind. It's got fun parts. Anyway.
All right. I think the order is definitely going to shift in the upcoming weeks when I compile a finalized list. But on the spot, I'm going to go number 5, Z for Zachariah. Number 4, I'm going to go with a film called Testament of Youth. I think it's one of the great anti-war films of all time I've seen.
Is there any particular actress in this movie?
Kit Harington.
Oh, I thought... No, a female actor in this movie.
Can't think of anyone.
Okay, never mind.
Who might that, for the sake of the listeners?
I actually don't remember her name.
Alicia Vikander?
Alicia Vikander, yeah.
Oh, I see.
The star of Man from U.N.C.L.E. and other films.
The star
of Danish Girl.
The Danish.
I'm glad you brought her up, because this next film is a great foreign film called Phoenix.
Oh, okay.
Excellent movie.
Nina Hoss.
Good choice.
Really good.
My second favorite movie of the year is a movie I think is one of the great children's movies of all time, and that is Kenneth Branagh's Cinderella.
Oh.
And
We got a little John Waters over here.
And my favorite film of the year, as of right now, I gotta go with Crimson Peak.
Yes. Crimson Peak.
And Melissa didn't even make your list. Interesting.
Well, it might in my revised order.
It may come on.
This is on the spot. I didn't really think much about this, but Anomalisa is the clear front runner here.
Right.
Yeah, I've not seen Hateful Eight or Star Wars, which I think should
or Son of
definitely
Saul.
make the top of the list. But just
Hateful Eight is the big one for sure for me that I have not seen.
I was gonna say the big one's Star Wars, but yeah.
Oh, I've seen Star Wars.
Yes,
it's not on my list.
You clarified for you, yeah. No, and obviously The Revenant, it got pushed back. It was supposed to be Christmas, got pushed back to January 8th.
Did it really? I think it's limited on Christmas, but January 8th.
No, it's 70mm Christmas. Which
they definitely are putting it out on Christmas for like the Oscars. They would not make it a January, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, regardless, I can tell you without even seeing that movie that it would be my favorite.
He actually got mad when he heard about a negative review of the movie. The idea that someone couldn't like it made him mad.
Yes,
to give you an
very
idea.
much.
He's like the Star Wars fans that are writing bad comments on negative
reviews. When
reviews.
it comes to Leonardo DiCaprio, I have very limited theory of mind, all right?
We're just clear about what we're about to hear coming up.
No. Okay. Well, anyways, any comments on each other's list? Well, no, I mean just
nice
anything,
list, bro. Nice
anything
list.
that popped out to you. Any shockers?
Any shockers? Let me look at the list here. I think my list is really good. I like that. We got Hunger Games on Connor's list. It's a good mention.
Have any of you seen, besides Phoenix, any of my other films?
Nope.
Or you saw Z for
let me take a look.
I did, yeah.
Where's your... Oh, there.
Crimson's and Phoenix.
I
No.
Oh, well.
I haven't seen them.
So I guess there's no comment
sure
on that.
they're okay. But I'm glad Mad Max is well represented, and as well as Anomalisa, except for Anthony's list, which is just these random
what
movies.
Yeah. I have overlap with each of these members.
Very Brooklyn vegan list.
Brooklyn vegan.
No, but so none of you have seen Spotlight. I was curious.
I've
No,
not.
I've been meaning to watch it.
I have the screener waiting for me.
Oh, you do?
Yeah, I do.
What, you got a screener? What are you, in the industry or what? No. It's good. It's very good. I would recommend it to one and all. But
check it out.
Without further ado, so the winner would be...
Anomalisa far and away with Mad Max in second place.
Okay, well, we had discussed prior to starting the podcast that the movie with the most votes, most points based on ranking and distribution would be automatically inducted into the 706. So, without further ado, welcome to the 706 Anomalisa. It's nice to have you. I hope you enjoy your stay. But no, let's continue on to the main course, the steak, the juicy, medium rare T-bone steak that is Body of Lies. The movie is basically, as I try to horribly sum this up, it follows let's see, it was released in 2008, so it follows a CIA operative embedded in Iraq and then in the Middle East. He moves from Iraq to Jordan to he goes to Dubai, but basically Leonardo DiCaprio. He plays Agent Ferris, and then we have Russell Crowe, who's kind of his handler back in Langley, who plays Ed Hoffman. We have Mark Strong, who's the head of Jordanian intelligence, and then this actress who I really did like. I've never seen her in anything else, but I'll butcher this. Golshifteh Farhani.
She's apparently in Exodus, Gods and Kings.
Yeah, she was. I really enjoyed her. Oscar Isaac is in this movie as well, which is worth noting. But he dies within
He's
the
in
first
it for 30 seconds. He's credited as Pizza Boy number 6. For
yes.
no.
Yeah, it's a short stay for Mr. Isaac. So basically, the movie follows the pursuit of kind of a Bin Laden archetype by means of intelligence gathering and obfuscation. And it's a very interesting movie. It contrasts cultural and ideological values in a way that can be alarming at times and brash. but necessary, I think. So let me go around the table and get some impressions. I you always start. Let's go this way.
Man,
I
was ready to go.
Yeah, let's go this way.
I think he usually goes last. I thought.
No,
yeah, I usually. All right,
regardless, I am the.
He's still holding Simon Killer.
I think I usually
I'm the commissioner
start
right
off,
now, so I will give it to Anthony. I don't have high expectations, by the way, and just laying down the reverse jinx. So go ahead, Anthony.
Do you think I hate this movie or something?
Oh gosh, that means you did. All right.
What?
He just took off his shirt.
Kirk, relax.
For some reason.
Stop.
For God's sakes. All right, stay focused.
This is a. When did this movie come out?
2008.
2008. Okay, so it's an interesting movie because when it came out, it was at a time when there weren't many movies being made about this sort of time period, this sort of war going on. It's a pretty interesting discussion, I think, that it is trying to entail within the movie. In terms of the movie itself, I didn't really like it. It's pretty bad, I thought. I was pretty disappointed. I felt like Ridley Scott was like Russell Crowe in this movie, sitting in his house, phoning this in from his computer. The direction I thought was pretty bad. It flows pretty unseamlessly. And, I mean, Leonardo DiCaprio, Oscar Isaac, and pretty much those two give decent performances. It's nothing special. It's kind of.
You didn't like Russell Crowe's performance?
No, I thought it was pretty bad. I have a lot of. I'll complain about why I think it's bad later on, but we'll get to it later. But so I'm still speaking.
Sorry.
Okay, I'll move to Connor.
Yeah, I had a very similar impression. I mean, there were parts of it that felt kind of generic. A lot of the things that I think were supposed to be shocking at the time, or if you had first seen it in theaters, didn't really shock me so much. I kind of came to expect sort of the scenes of suicide bombing out of the blue, that kind of thing. Some of the violence, while effective and visceral and gripping, still just sort of by the standards of things we've seen more recently, it just did not kind of hold up. Yes, it was it's an interesting narrative, and certainly it's an interesting movie to look at as part of movies and commentary on the American War on Terror. But other than that, I can't say it's a movie I'd recommend as like a classic.
Yeah, this movie's actually fairly hard to watch. Not like watching it as I'm watching it, but like it's hard to track down and see. Because the only way to actually see this movie is on TNT on Saturday afternoons. So that was kind of tough.
Hey, it's also on FX.
or FX sometimes, or FXX rather. But yeah, this movie basically started it was originated as a Call of Duty the movie project. And they lost the rights to Call of Duty, so then they made it this other thing. And, Ridley Scott, he's got some good movies, he's got some great movies, but so often... Exodus, Gods and Kings, his recent stuff, it just feels like Robin Hood.
This is not Blade Runner.
It feels like he's just like, yeah, exactly. It just kind of feels like he's phoning it in sometimes. And this movie had some good scenes. It had some good sequences. I thought the violence worked pretty well. There are some pretty solid looking explosions. Like I think the gun battles towards the beginning with the blood. Again, they feel very Call of Duty-esque, but I think they do work. They are visceral. They are fairly like striking. Like, oh man, it's just very basic like squibs and whatever they use, blanks and squibs stuff, but it looks pretty good. It's like, oh, that's cool. And then you have the torture scenes and stuff. You have the scene where Leonardo DiCaprio gets his finger broken off with like a hammer, which is very intense and just makes you wince. Which I'm not saying that's like makes the movie good or anything, but like it's it makes you there. You're like, oh man, you're present for that moment. It works. It puts you in his shoes and makes you wince. I think there's something to be said for that. But, I mean, I just think that the plot, it felt very kind of stock, like paperback, like sort of contemporary, but not really. There wasn't anything super subversive or biting or like challenging about this movie that I was maybe hoping for a movie set with this sort of plot and this sort of context. There was nothing, I didn't think it really brought anything to the table that I hadn't seen in other movies.
Enough.
Why are you shutting me down?
Because we don't need an 8-page
You went on for twice as long about my movie and how much you hated it. I don't have that much more to say.
Any more premeditated quips you got? Any more?
I got my two quips in so far. I got my quips in. I'll think of more, I'm sure. Now I forgot what I was going to say. No, I mean, when you compare it to something like The Hurt Locker or Zero Dark 30, movies I don't even particularly like. I just think this is This feels much more kind of stock, like TV ready, less intriguing, less like dark or intense, you know. So I wasn't a huge fan of this, I gotta say.
TV ready. It's a palatable movie. Like and there's nothing wrong with that. I think there's this like very, very like there's a prevailing pretentious sentiment about that. Like, really, come on, like okay, there aren't 8 subplots and like there's no huge subtext that comments on the nihilistic
no fewer than
notions.
5 subplots is good for a movie. For
Anyways, I'm sort of being facetious, but the idea is
the idea
is that this movie, I think, though not excellent, not well executed in certain respects, I think the pacing is off. I think the story is a little bit muddled. But I think when it succeeds at doing what it aims to do. Like for instance, the last scene where it's the
what does it aim to do?
Ultimate.
Also? What does it aim to do when you get to that point?
When I get to what point?
Oh, keep going. I'll ask you again later.
Okay, no. When Leonardo DiCaprio is in the hands of the enemy, he comes face to face with the caliphate, or whoever this individual is.
Al-Salim.
Al-Salim, yes.
Yeah, he was the leader of a terrorist
and
cell.
it's intimated that he's going to have his head cut off on, while it's recorded. It's very. That's something that I think. ISIS is. We're going to talk about contemporary, geopolitical events because it's what makes this movie relevant to me. But so I think that's something that terror groups like ISIS have played on for years, and that's how they've developed such a strong polarization. Their use of unmitigated ferocity and their strict denial of anything concerning the rules of war. So I really appreciated that idea of there were these. It's just these contrasts. Like for me, the movie was about not only this spatial separation between the United States and the Middle East, but also the temporal separation between the United States and the Middle East. The Middle East, it plays from the very beginning the idea that these terrorist cells are succeeding because they disavow themselves of any sort of technology, and they use written, physical, material means of communication. I really appreciated that, whereas we live in this information technology ridden age, and so it's it kind of gives some insight into perhaps why there is an ideological dissonance. It's not necessarily just these people have different beliefs than us. It's that these people aren't operating necessarily in the same world we are. Their realities are different than our realities. It's not just that their beliefs are different than our beliefs. It's that their experience of the world is different. So and the movie obviously didn't do it as well as certain others, but I think it's an okay movie, and it's better than you're selling it short by saying TNT. I would say at least USA Network.
Yeah,
is that better?
I was gonna say.
Yes, no.
Catch it on Cinemax.
AMC even.
And I think what it sets out to do. Yeah, I kind of outlined just what I think it sets out to do, and just the idea of U.S. intervention in the Middle East. Obviously, we're all familiar with that, and how evil begets more evil, and that was the premise of the quote in the beginning of the movie, that those to whom evil is done do evil in return. So it's a very interesting political commentary that's relevant still to this day, though dated. I agree with Connor, though a little dated, even only 7 years later.
Mm-hmm.
But I'd like to hear some more. Anthony, what were you? I mean, what specifically irked you about either how the narrative was presented, or maybe the mechanics of the movie? What is at the front of your mind right now when you're thinking about Body of Lies?
Okay, well, I'll start, since I brought it up, and I think Tony was about to jump on it too, is my annoyance with Russell Crowe's portrayal of his character. I don't even remember the name.
Hoffman, who's
okay.
like a CIA kind of handler.
Yeah.
All right, so the way he portrays it is something that really bugs me in films and TV. I think the style of it is, even Tony brought this up during the movie, it feels similar to Frank Underwood from House of Cards, portrayed by Kevin Spacey.
Yeah.
And what's funny is he has this sort of accent in the movie that's somewhat of a nondescript Southern West sort of tone to it. And what I find really annoying about this is it becomes, I think, too easy for movies to adopt this, because our instant connection with hearing this is to automatically go to one source. It is kind of this Southern Republican ideology.
George Bush,
yeah. I mean, people have argued George Bush adopted for his presidency.
Yes.
And, I mean, it just feels like this movie's way too black and white for me in that sense. Is we have this guy who is, in some sense, if we're trying to get with the general criticism of that party, whether we agree with it or not, hawkish, and the way he's portrayed, the way he kind of carries himself almost feels sort of animalistic in that sense, and he's always in that sort of mode. I just don't think it works, and it kind of bugs me, and I don't like where that character goes, and I don't like how the film resolves itself at the end.
How about, just really quickly, Tony, how about the idea that the American side of the movie, the Americans are caricaturized as much as undoubtedly the Muslims in the movie are caricaturized? How about that as an intentional, not necessarily a negligent factor in the movie? You know, the idea that in our collective consciousness we view, you know, the CIA or whomever is pulling the strings to be some sort of Southern radical. You know, what do you guys think?
I don't think it was like so you're saying that's intended as sort of a like, this is what we think he's. I don't think that's.
There was obviously
not contextualized at all. There's no reason for us to think that's what's going on. That's just like, that's such a leap for me.
I think it's.
I don't know.
I have a hard time thinking the film established that sort of connection at all.
But this character. So the gist of the character, the point they hit every single time we see him. It keeps repeating the same point over and over. Is like, he's so disconnected from what's going on. Leo even says it towards the end of the movie in case we missed it. You know, the 8 times we saw it. We see him at his house, like hanging out with his kids, doing stuff.
He's at home in Virginia.
He's always working.
As opposed to Leonardo, who's on the ground in Jordan and in Iraq.
Yeah, we see him at soccer games. We see him like at home helping his son in the bathroom, or whatever. It's like we just keep seeing this over and over. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess it's just like. It ended up being like almost like a punchline.
It's fair to mention though that he does show up on the ground. He doesn't do ground activity, but he does show up in the areas.
That's true. He does show up towards the end. He does come
and in the middle.
And he is several times.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I know what happened to feed him. Yes, but they did return to this point.
He tends to mess things up when he does go on the ground.
Yeah.
Real quick, while we're talking about accents, Leo's accent in this movie makes no sense. He has like a southern accent for like 40% of the movie, and then just totally drops it.
And then it's like the Bronx.
I think that's why he hasn't won an Oscars. They saw this movie and they're like, "That's so annoying. We can't
Maybe
award
he should
this."
take acting tips from you.
I think he should. I think I could help him out.
Connor, what do you have for us?
No, I find this very interesting. It's definitely what I wanted to talk about is the Russell Crowe character and some of the themes that you mentioned, Kirk. Yes, it seems to be that the movie is trying to make this point of we keep on seeing Leo who's suffering in these situations, in these live fire situations, and he calls up Ed Hoffman, and Hoffman says this, he says that, he says work with this, do this. Constantly Leo's plans are thwarted by kind of the bigwigs back home at the CIA. And we see constantly that Ed Hoffman, he's living in his big house, he's with his nice family. It is certainly a portrayal of this is the kind of American domesticity versus the sort of real messed up, more medieval existence that reigns in the Middle East. However, I find this kind of like a very like problematic thing too, because it's like, one of the things the character of Ed Hoffman, of Russell Crowe's character, says at the beginning, again, he's this sort of war hawk kind of George Bush-esque sort of character, as he says he's giving some kind of little order to someone, to some other foreign intelligence service, and he's saying it's like
We're actually filming this in a Radio Shack.
Radio Shacks are all closed. This is actually the closed location. It's
Yes.
an abandoned Radio Shack.
I thought it was a Circuit
We
City.
have candles lit. It's actually Vigil.
Yeah, so he's saying these things, and then he says like, here's the thing: it's we are civilization, and it's so easy for civilization to be dismantled by these people, meaning the Al Qaeda, right? Mm-hmm. So, and it is this thing. It's a thing of East versus West. It's a thing of civilization versus savagery, and I think that's really like bad way of thinking about it, and it's a way that has gotten us. This made all of this so much worse.
Don't you think that was intentional, though?
A little bit, but there's nothing to really kind of reinforce that.
The movie seems to earnestly believe that.
Yeah, it kind of does.
What really bugs me too, now that we get to the East and West, is the one sort of unity in the East and West, not counting Mark Strong's sort of forged kind of hidden alliance with Leonardo DiCaprio's character, is the romantic relationship. Just to me feels so off in this movie and so like awful. It is, because on one hand we have Leonardo DiCaprio as the white American, and the girl he's interested as kind of the representative of sort of this culture in a positive light. She's a nurse. She's in fact healing people as opposed to causing destruction or destroying anything. So, I have a hard time buying them together. I have a hard time accepting what the film's trying to say through their relationship. And none of it feels like it's earned itself by the time we get there.
Yeah, Kirk, why did she just end up with him? She's a nurse. She's a professional, right? He just sees her the third time, and she immediately...
What?
She's like, I'm sort of being facetious.
I see. He's referencing my critique of Simon Killer.
I don't really buy it either. It feels very, very technical. As soon as we see them in a scene together, the way the camera holds on her, holds on his face... It's just like, okay.
Dollar Tree version Aaron Paul, who has a slight addiction to
about.
bath salts, is not comparable to Leonardo DiCaprio. I'm very sorry.
Okay, they may be different talent actors, but the film itself, though, is not showing why this
matter.
relationship.
It's not relevant. It's in this movie. Yeah. It's in this
He's
movie.
He's a good-looking dude. What's the other guy? He's
We're not talking about Simon Killer. We're talking about Body of Lies.
Well, you brought up Simon Killer. All right, we're getting.
So I'd like to move on to something else, but before I do that, there is someone downstairs in the lobby waiting for me. I have to go. So can we take a brief intermission?
We will be back shortly.
It'll last like 1 second in real time. Okay, so what I wanted to bring up was the character we've been talking about. We've been focusing on Leo versus Russell Crowe's character and
the relationship.
Home versus Abroad and the relationship. Now, I want to pay attention to one other really major character I think was supposed to be sort of an innovation and something cool that the movie did, was that it paid a lot of attention to the role of the Jordanian Secret Service in Middle Eastern counter-terror sort of investigation and enforcement. And we have this character named Hani who is played by Mark Strong. And he's a character that Leo constantly works with, but he has this sort of shifting relationship with. They sort of it's a relationship of trust, but there's a lot of strange betrayals and there's a lot of real tension between them. So what did we think about that character in that part of the movie?
I thought Mark Strong was honestly, he was. All right, I thought Mark Strong probably gave the best performance. Honestly, I thought he was very good in the movie. I enjoyed whenever he was on screen. Although his habit of saying "my dear" in every scene quickly grew, kind of became like a caricature, like kind of a parody after a short while. But I did enjoy it.
It was a bit of like the threatening foreign count or something, with a little bit of homoeroticism.
The British actor portraying a Jordanian.
That's true. Yeah.
No, very fucked up actually.
Yeah. Why is the one Middle Eastern actress that we see who's not a villain the girl, the love interest? Well, it's kind of.
I think actually. Mark Strong's character can be viewed as the most honorable, the most meritorious person in the movie. Why is that? How is that not relevant? Explain to me.
The fact that he's played by a white guy.
He said the only Middle Eastern character that's not a villain is the woman.
No, definitely.
He's not a villain as well.
Sorry, I thought you were just addressing the fact that.
Well,
I was speaking about the actor.
This character, Hani, represents the kind of the idea of the good Arab, which I think this movie does treat as kind of problematic in some way because it acknowledges that these good Arabs are also the members of these monarchies, these sort of not very fair, not very democratic regimes. He has a certain kind of French colonial sort of vibe to him, which kind of goes back to sort of the pro-Western forces in Middle Eastern cultures. It is interesting. It is, I think, not a completely positive view, but ultimately he is the sort of the good Arab of this movie.
I like the contrast of, he's very effective at his job. He's very good at obtaining intelligence, persuasion, and that's contrasted with the ineptitude of this nation that's exponentially bigger with far more resources, but yet doesn't seem to understand how to be a cultural broker in a world so foreign to the United States. So, but I do think I just wanted to clarify a point that I had mentioned earlier about like the temporal aspect. I wouldn't I wasn't casting aspersions on. I wasn't trying to say like the U.S. is modern and the Middle East would be backwards. That's not necessarily what I was saying. Just that they're different. Not necessarily assigning value to them, but that we're so very much different in the way we think. But let me ask. Okay.
Speaking on your point, though, one thing I notice happens a lot in the films is reuse shots. How many times do we have to see the building of the American embassy and like this white screenshot of American embassy?
There's a lot of abrupt cuts to black and then a new place with a title on it, which I never really got used to that. It was a weird effect.
Very episodic though, in a way.
Yeah, they're like, all right,
which I think agrees with Kirk's point. Yeah.
I do have to say a point that I think everybody would be in agreement would be about midway through the film, the beginning of kind of the second act, third act maybe, is when Leonardo DiCaprio is starting to establish this scheme. He develops a disguise, very deceiving disguise of basically, was that Just for Men gel or something?
No, he looks like he was dressed as the boss in Horrible Bosses 3. Like, he totally complaining. He had
Christoph Waltz,
evil DiCaprio. He had like bigger eyebrows and like blonde hair. Mm-hmm. Actually, it was a good look for him. I like to imagine Leo did that for like the next month of his life. He just kept doing that. It was really pretty cool. But yeah, it was kind of funny. It was the disguise scene. I'm like, disguise scene, come on. And then they didn't disappoint.
Check mark.
It was kind of indicative of certain other kind of logical fallacies, like Connor pointed out. There was this there was a photo of an architect who was basically the patsy, and some sort of terrorist banker having a party together or partying together, and it garnered international attention from international.
Other terrorists.
Terrorists as well as organizations like the CIA and Saudi intelligence. Mm-hmm. So, but you pointed that out. It's like that's seemingly harmless, but
it's just a lawyer and an architect meeting. Why do they assume that because one of them has Al Qaeda connections that it must not be that?
And they're not even quite Al Qaeda connections. He's accepting money from a group who may have Al Qaeda connections.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah, I was a bit fuzzy on that, but
it's a huge leap, I feel like, for an intelligence team to make, but,
but
it's something we have to accept for the film.
Let's accept, yeah.
So, Anthony, was there any silver lining in this movie? Was there anything?
Yeah, I mean, I saw Oscar Isaac for like 15 minutes. That was cool.
All right, fair enough.
The ending scene.
Let's talk about that.
Before actually quite the ending scene, but the kind of third act of Leon kind of getting captured, and it is a moment I was actually curious, like, where's this going to go? Like, are they actually going to like kill this guy off? What's going to happen? It is actually like a very brutal kind of moment. We hear about this in the news certainly back then, and we still kind of think about it. But the scene of him possibly getting beheaded or tortured in front of a camera is actually it's pretty hard to watch. It feels very real. I think the acting there is phenomenal from both the Leonardo DiCaprio and the villain in that scene. It's really good. I don't like how the overall film resolves afterwards, but that moment I think is a redeeming quality of the movie.
Yes,
it rang in the implicit emotional memory that I have of watching, unknowingly watching the beheading videos of like Nick Berg and Daniel Pearl when I was like 12 years old. So these fears have propagated and kind of potentiated in my mind the idea of this brutal beheading, this total atavistic yet seemingly alien act. But what did you guys think of that final scene?
No, I thought that scene was good. I said my first thing is that was one of the better parts of the movie. Just it's visceral and it's intense, and I don't think it really operates. I don't think it functions in like the larger context of the movie as like a great climax, like this has all been building to this or anything. But I think in a vacuum, it's a well done scene with good acting, etc. Yes.
What do you think, Connor?
Yeah, I thought it was good acting. Like I said, maybe I'm a bit hung up because I'm so afraid myself of of seeming like I am affected by these narratives, or that I don't want to be the bad, the ignorant American. I guess I'm almost too hung up on that kind of thing. I found it a bit like dramatic. It's a bit too good versus evil in the end. It was a very much a give and take.
It was like, you'll never break me. They're like, we'll never break him. Give up.
They're like dressed. I mean, the light's kind of shining on Leo, and the villain's in the shadow. He's dressed in black. Yeah.
See, that's precisely why I like that scene. Is it's just like basically a 360-degree fuck you to like radical Islam and the idea of like beheadings.
But I mean, you're bringing this complex kind of moral issue down.
It's very cathartic.
Yeah, I guess
it's reductive. Okay. Of course, it's reductive.
But a movie has to be in some way.
The scared kid in me, the xenophobic person in me, was very appeased by the idea of Leonardo DiCaprio using the terrorists' own logic against them and discussing the Quran and certain other aspects like that.
Well, as we wrap up then on this this film, though, I want to move then, because of the way you said that, to the ending scene of Leonardo DiCaprio's character talking to Russell Crowe and Russell Crowe trying to recruit him back, calling him not American if he doesn't stay and help out with the army and the intelligence, and Russell Crowe's basically calling out the kind of Islamic culture or whatever, and Leonardo says, that's a problem, and I feel like after that scene of what you're saying though, and then hearing that, it just kind of makes that whole point like moot. It just
makes the whole point what?
Moot. Like it kind of undoes it. It doesn't feel like, after seeing the kind of torture scene and then hearing that, it doesn't work for me. But you said you liked it.
Leo really loves the Middle East.
Yeah, and that brings me back to my earlier issue. Is the one thing that's getting him to stay is this girl who he went out with like twice. Which, even if we're assuming there's kind of this like grand love or something between them, it doesn't really feel right, and I almost feel like it's almost kind of unsettling to see.
I like the distinction between like Connor said, the good era, but the idea of everyday people doing everyday things, and then there's this very small tangent group of people that are trying to end the world, and I like the contrast there between the nurse and the terrorist cell. But we are kind of running low on time, so why don't we move to the final phase of this event, this program, and let's I mean, I know what it's going to be, but just so three of you say no really quickly.
We're voting.
Yes, tell us why it was worse than Simon Killer.
So, I think that for the 706, both the podcast and the concept of this list, to have any kind of integrity, we need to keep Body of Lies as far away from it as possible. I am a no.
It's as harsh as I was on this movie, I think, to Kirk, and it is Christmas time, and it is the season of giving.
God.
But I'm going to say no. Okay. I'm going to say no anyway.
And yes, and I will have to say no as well.
You said yes first, though. That's.
Just
kidding.
No, really interesting movie, and I think we need to start looking back retrospectively at a lot of these movies to try to figure out how our culture has been talking about these issues. It still is not resolved. I wish we should do that more, I think.
We also, I think, haven't had a great movie for me that represents that sort of culture, though.
I don't think we've quite had a movie that can really sum that up for us. We're still trying, but it is interesting. So it was a very interesting watch. I'm glad I picked it, but I can't say it was a classic,
I think it was good for the podcast to see something a little bit more mainstream, but at the same time a little bit dislocated from necessarily our cultural milieu. So. But why don't we go to the recommendation section of the podcast, and we'll go around, and I will decide what our next movie will be when we come back from our break to start the second half of season 1. So, who would like to go first?
Me? Oh my! All right. Well, I had a list of movies to suggest to Kirk, just for Kirk. Then I watched a movie. As so often happens, I recently watched a movie that I really like, so I'm going to bring it up. It's a movie called, I'm totally I have it.
Wow.
Sounds really enthused.
No, I am. I absolutely am. No, a movie called The Overnighters, which is a documentary that came out last year. That's 2014. I don't know when will go up, but a 2014 movie. And it's since become my favorite movie of 2014. It is a documentary about this town where basically their fracking is going on. So a bunch of men come in for work. A lot of them leave their families like back where they came from, and they come to get work and send money back. But there's just nowhere for them to live because they don't make enough money and there's not enough housing. So this man basically opens up his church for these men to live there. And this was a movie to me that's incredibly powerful. This is a movie about like what it means to like be a hero and what it means to like care for other people, and it represents kind of the best of humanity. And I think there are some turns in it and some developments that are incredibly powerful. And I would compare it honestly to like something like the third season of The Wire, but non-fictional, or that sort of thing. So I love this movie. I think it is one of the best documentaries I've seen. I think it'd be good to just talk about a documentary on this podcast. So.
Okay.
I totally forgot the segment was happening. I've been really scrambling to try to find a good movie. I'm still kind of undecided, but okay, here goes. I'm going to suggest Tom Tykwer's, I think it's a 2004 film, Perfume, starring Benjamin Whishaw. Very interesting movie. Tom Tykwer famously directed Lola Rent, which is I'm sorry, I butchered that pronunciation, but it's Run Lola Run. You may have heard of it. Famous kind of movie of the 90s. Perfume is something very different. It's the story of a murderer based on the novel from the 80s.
Kurt Cobain's favorite novel.
A German novel, yeah. Takes place in 18th century France. It's all about the idea of smell. And it's a very weird, very creepy, very funky movie, but there's no other movie that's done quite what it's done. So I like it a lot.
Well, I like where our choices went this week, but I'm going to go with a little classic. I don't think anyone has seen it here, and I'm actually surprised if you guys all haven't seen it. But I got to go with one of my favorites of all time. It's 2001's Wes Anderson's The Royal Tenenbaums. And it's about a family. Thanks, Kirk. It's about a family called the Tenenbaums. Basically, it follows them into their adult lives as they see the shadow of a divorce that's loomed over their childhood begin to rekindle when their dad pretends to have terminal cancer in a way to get back some money and live on his own again. And it's a great movie. I would really love to discuss it.
Okay.
Counter arguments?
Yeah.
All right, counter arguments. Well, I've seen Perfume, and it's interesting. I wouldn't mind watching it again. I don't think I can honestly call it a great movie or a 706 worthy movie. I think it's fun to watch, or it's got a lot of interesting stuff. It's my kind of movie, but I don't think it has like there's like greatness to it. I think it's kind of an experiment that's like interesting to watch, which doesn't mean there's no value in it. It doesn't mean it's not worth watching for this, but that would be an argument against it. As for Royal Tenenbaums, that's tougher because that's a movie I've wanted to see for a long time. It probably is great, but I think my movie brings something a little more different to the table. I think we watch movies more similar to that than we had watched to mine. I think a documentary would bring something new, and I think this is a really special movie, a really kind of relevant, interesting movie, and I think that we would have a lot to say about it.
So I think I've already seen Anthony's movie, and I do like I Heart the Huckabees, but it's just kind of like, I don't know, it's not really that great.
It's Kurt Cobain's least favorite movie.
I think it's Kurt Cobain's least favorite movie. And as for this whatever fracking movie, I've already watched a lot of the Vice documentaries on fracking. It's really messed up, dude.
I would actually like to discuss the documentary. I don't really have an interest in watching the movie as much as Tony has sold it over this past week. Maybe I'll get around to it on my own. I have nothing really to say about it. As for Perfume, I've seen it. I don't really know if I have much to discuss about it, or if I even really want to rewatch it as much as I love Ben Whishaw, and as much as I love the kind of cultural figures who adore the book, and I don't even know if they adore the movie. But as for the Royal Tenenbaums, it's very unlike I Heart Huckabees, first of all. It has great acting performances from everyone there. It's one of Gene Hackman's last movies. It is the movie most people would consider Wes Anderson's masterpiece, and it's, I think, just one of the great movies of the past decade overall. Also, I haven't gone again since.
That will not factor.
I think for him bringing that up, that should count against him.
I feel like after Kirk brought that up every week from Spice World.
That's true, but I think Connor should not have picked him for that reason. For keep bringing it up, I would have kept snubbing him until he grew to excited.
He didn't pick it exclusively for that reason. He wanted to see the movie, like he said. he was interested. But let me go down the list. Make sure I've heard you guys right. So it's The Blind Side with Sandra Bullock. That's what you want to see, like something about
To Tony.
and tackling, frackling. What is is it some sort of southern delicacy? I don't know. Anyways, and then Cologne. Yeah, I don't want to see Cologne. I have enough Dracar Noir. All right, please. And the Loyal Tether Pole. What is that about? I don't even know. It seems very abstract. I don't know if I want to be pushed that far. Anyways,
Nice.
I do think that Perfume would have the highest variance for me. I think it could end up being like one of my most favorite movies ever, or one of my extreme waste of time, and that scares me. The Outsiders.
Is that what it's called?
The Overnighters.
The Overnighters. Excuse me. That one was actually unintentional, but I feel like and this it shouldn't be necessarily held against the movie. I might watch this actually over break, and the idea that maybe a documentary. The idea of a documentary on this podcast is very important, but I think maybe we could do better.
I disagree. 100%.
Anyways, I will have to give it to the Royal Tenenbaums,
Nice.
simply because Anthony is such a huge fan of Wes Anderson, and I really think he'll pull out all the stops for all the bells and whistles.
Get a word in edgewise.
See all those stops? You're not going to see him next week. He's pulling them all.
Yes, I think this will be a great episode, and I've been wanting to see this movie for about 10 years, and I just never have gotten around to it. So this is me deciding, being determinate, and saying that I want to see the Royal Tenenbaums, and I want to hear the impressions of Wes Anderson Jr. So congratulations, Anthony.
Ooh.
Yes. But with that, we wish you a happy holiday. We thank you so much for your loyal support through these last 7 episodes.
Thanks, Mom. We'll see you soon.
What are you, Tony? Are you any reflections?
Happy New Year's resolutions.
Oh, anything to say? Any reflections on the episodes?
Anything to say? What do you?
Anything to say?
Do you regret World's Greatest Dad? Do you?
I regret. I don't regret anything. I regret nothing.
Okay.
All my movies I picked have been masterpieces.
I see. All right.
I nearly quit on 2 episodes in particular. I'm not going to name names. Let's just say I think we know who we're talking about. But
oh boy.
I am looking forward to discussing the Royal Tenenbaums next time, and we'll be back at the end of January.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, guys. We'll see you next year.
I regret nothing.
Oh, I'm sorry,
I
Connor.
had a great time with my friends watching movies, and I'm looking forward to doing it after the break.
Connor, you should have told me I will regret my words and deeds in the words of a great Hideo Kojima. Anyways, thanks, guys. We'll see you next year.